So again, good morning and welcome to the June CounterSketch solution session. My name is Heather Kutzman and I will be leading the webinar with you guys this morning. In today's webinar, we hope to cover a good bit of information. So we're definitely going to do two Pinterest to price examples where we grab some trending styles that I've seen on Pinterest and work on how we can build those out in CounterSketch. We're also going to look at the render tools and settings. This is a feature that has been in CounterSketch, I think probably since the very beginning, but it's a really helpful tool. It's something that you can use to promote your business, a good way to kind of help give your customers a visual. So I think it has a lot of different options. And so we're going to go in, take a look at some of those render settings and how you can switch things up to create maybe some different types of renders than what you've created in the past. And finally, we're going to spend just a few minutes looking over some recent designs that were added to the library. Every month we add new designs and new freehand parts, and I know that you guys are busy, you've got a lot going on in your stores, and so we're going to take just a couple of minutes to review those new designs and see if it's something that you might want to spend a little bit more time with later on. So that's what we hope to do on today's webinar. As I mentioned, we're going to start out with Pinterest to price. And our first example is, again, with these Pinterest to price, we're kind of trying to get a theme, right? So we're not trying to exactly copy another design that maybe the customer has seen, but kind of take the ideas behind a group of designs and start to create something new and unique. So in this example, the customer has picked several designs that all include geometric shaped gemstones. They're also either bezel or prong set. In this case, two of them are bezel, one is prong. And they have strips of accent diamonds around them to kind of draw your eye in different directions and add a little extra texture and interest to the design. And it looks like, and it's hard to tell on this one at the bottom, but some of them are cathedral and sometimes they're split shank as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag when it comes to the shank itself. We've got lots of different ways that we could go about this. So those are kind of the inspiration photos that we received from the customer. And now we're going to hop into CounterSketch and work out how we could actually build some of these designs. Maybe we know that the customer's favorite is really this one in the upper right corner where it has kind of these bezel set geometric stones, but maybe they have some diamonds from, maybe they sold some scrap gold and they have some extra loose melly diamonds and they like to incorporate this idea of some stones mixed in with the gems as well. So we're going to create something that kind of has that thought to it. All right, so without further ado, we're going to hop over into CounterSketch. The version of CounterSketch that I'm using is the release candidate for our July launch. So my screen will look significantly different than the screen that you're working with. So this is just kind of a preview of what we hope to have in your hands in July. Probably the middle of July is what we're shooting for. And if you follow us on social media, you can kind of start to see some additional previews of new features and things like that of what we've got coming out for the new release that's going to come out, like I said, in mid-July. But a lot of the functionality that I'm going to do, so pretty much everything that I am going to click on, if you click on something similar in your screen, you're going to get the same result. So while things may look a little bit different, the functionality is going to be very much the same. So I don't want you to think that you can't do the things that I'm doing in this webinar until you get the release in July. Again, most of these pieces already exist in the library, and so it's just when you click on the button may be colored a little bit differently, or the arrow may represent a little bit differently, but pretty much everything is going to be exactly the same functionality to what you currently have in CounterSketch that you're using today. So for this example, we're actually going to go straight into freehand to get started. And then within freehand, I'm going to select a shank. And I really think that I would like to do a split shank and a plain split shank. So I'm going to build a split shank using two cathedral shanks. So this is pretty straightforward, but I do want to spend just a minute or two talking about it. I'm going to select this cathedral shank because I think it's got a nice shape to it. And then when I open it up, I'm going to mirror it across the top so that I have two of these shanks kind of living in the same environment. So here's that shank. I'm going to use top mirror. So that actually creates two, but I don't see it because it's kind of right on top of the first one. So to make that second mirrored shank visible, I'm just going to start to angle this out a little bit. And you can see there, like I said, once we move them off of that center point, they both come into view. And you can see now that I've created this split shank version of that single cathedral shank. The other thing I'm going to do is actually remove the accent diamonds down the side. So again, if I look at my design stack over here on the left, I do have the ability to remove the bridge as well as the gems. I'm going to leave the bridge, but I'm going to remove those accent gems down the side. The other thing I want to do before I start adding my gems out onto the screen is just widen this space for the bridge up quite a bit, because I know that I've got some really large gemstones that I want to put in this space in the middle, and I want to be sure that I've got plenty of room for those. So I'm going to look up here, and these kind of pieces of the shank are called the shoulder. So I'm going to choose to move my shoulder from side to side, and I'm just going to increase the spacing there. So these kind of start to come back. And then I've got a design choice. So this is where we really want to kind of involve the consumer, is ask them, do you like how this kind of pinches up at the top and comes to a point? Or would you prefer something that was maybe more rounded when we're working in this design? So we've got two different versions of this shank that we can use, and we just need to know kind of what the customer's preference is for those. As we're doing all of this, be sure that you set your finger size right off the bat. So for example, right now I've got this at a size 7. If, say, my customer was a size 5, I can update that, but then I start to get some weirdness down here at my shanks. So I may need to move things around a little bit just to get more of a smooth profile on these. And so we want to make sure from the beginning that our finger size is accurate. All right, so that's a pretty good base for us to start from. You can always go in and adjust the profile shapes of these shanks as well if you wanted to get something a little bit more rounded or more narrow, any of those options. However, to kind of keep us moving, we're going to say that this looks pretty good and we're happy with that overall shank shape. If we want, we can always go back and change the profile after we get the other pieces of our design in place. So we're next going to add those large gems. So I'm just going to come down here to left click on add freehand parts, look under my settings, and I'm going to find a bezel setting that has that kind of cutout or opening on the side, which this one does. So I'm going to click start designing and open this up to start playing with the different shapes that we have available. So I'm probably going to go with a cushion for one of my shapes, and we're just going to left click to drag this up, and then we can kind of place it where we want it to go. The styles that the customer showed really had kind of a neat offset, kind of opposite design to them. And I also want to be mindful of the fact that I'm building this ring to kind of look cohesive. So I want to go in and adjust the placement of the stones so that they kind of follow the overall contour of the ring. So that looks pretty good. And then I want another one on this side over here in the upper left. So I'm just going to left click on my opposite mirror option, and that will put that other stone over on the other side. And now we know that those are kind of exact replicas of each other. You can always go in here at any point and adjust the size of these. So if we wanted these to be larger, we could definitely do that. And then the next thing we want to do is add that second stone. So I may want to move these guys apart just a little bit so that I've got a little bit more space for that second stone when it comes in to fill in the other gaps. But we can move them around once we get them in place, so they don't have to be perfect when we first put them on the design. So I'm going to come down here because I want to use this same style setting, and I'm just going to left click on my options menu, and then I'm going to choose the second option, which is duplicate selected. So it's just going to make a copy of those stones that we currently have on our screen. Now we're just going to move that copied stone over. And actually, let's do this another way. I'm going to undo that. Rather than move it over and try to get my positioning right, I'm just going to move it forward. And when I do that, you can see now my curves, kind of the angle that I have my stone at is right. That gives me a much better result than kind of moving left to right. And maybe these we're just going to make round, but we also need to make them a good bit smaller so that they can fit in around those cushion cut stones that we have. So we'll shrink them down a good bit, and we may have to move, kind of reposition things once we get them in place. And you can go back and fine tune the angles of these if you want, just to make sure that everything is connecting the way you want it to. So we've got our initial kind of geometric shapes out there. We've done our cathedral shank and our split shank, and now we want to go back and add some like strips of diamonds in here to add some of that texture and visual interest. So the next thing I'm going to do is left click on my freehand parts, look under settings, and within our settings we actually have some strip settings of stones. So I'm just going to scroll down here till I find those, and these guys look pretty good. So we'll add those out onto our screen to start using them in our design as well. And I'm going to start by just moving this straight up so that we can start to get an idea of placement. I'm also going to rotate it about 90 degrees so we can see it in connection with the rest of the pieces. And I don't really need it to be curved. So right now it has a curvature to it. So I can flatten that out by just taking that through finger curve to 0. And now we have just a straight line of stones to work with. And I think what I'm going to try to do is put maybe one strip between these and another strip over here between these. And so that way we'll have kind of a broken line as it runs through our piece. Right now this piece is way too long, so I can come up here to my length and left click and drag that over. And that looks a little bit better, a little bit more in proportion to our design. And it also is very wide, so these stones are set in kind of a channel with prongs type configuration, and it's got a really wide base to it. So I'm going to come over here, and it's considered the shank part of the ring if you want to think about it that way. And so I can just decrease the width. And I can do this at either end. So you can see here I decreased width A, but width B is still wider. So I'll just need to come down to width B and do the same thing. So that gets my metal more into proportion. The stones might be a little large for what I've got here. Alternatively, what I could do is come in and move these stones away from each other a little bit more so that we've got a little bit more space for those stones, which is what I think I might do. The other thing I can do is maybe decrease the length of this again. You can see right now, based on the length, the size of the stone, all of those factors, CounterSketch is doing the math for me, and because of the placement, a single prong orientation is what's working out best. However, if I go back to this piece, and I'm just going to adjust the length a little bit more, so I'm going to expand control range for the length, and we'll just move it down just a little bit. Sometimes we can start to see like if a two-prong configuration comes into view. Based on this, I still think it's too long, so we can decrease the length a little bit more, and I think that's a little bit more in line with what we're looking for. And it's easy, you guys can see this is really fine tuning. So if you want, you can literally just left click on the line and that'll move it kind of one kind of little bit every time, and that way you can kind of incrementally increase the length without running the slider and maybe going further than you want to go. So again, left clicking on this line in either direction will take you at an incremental step, which I think is what we needed for this. So we've got one strip of diamonds, and we're going to do the same thing that we did with the gemstones and just left click on mirror opposite, and that brings those over to the other side. Now you'll remember we kind of moved these larger gems over so that we would have more space, and when we did that, it's possible that it started to cut into this bezel, so we can go back and widen out our shanks here if we want. Or if maybe the customer is liking those diamonds so much they would actually like to add the accent gems back on the shanks, we can come down here and just say gems on and take a look to see how that goes together, which I don't think is too shabby actually. I think that gives it something a little extra. Once you have your design, or really at any phase in the design process, you can go in and update these gemstone colors. So I'm going to left click up here to turn off my viewport control handles, just so those are a little less distracting. And then I can use my any gem, any color to come in and individually select these stones and apply a color to them. So we've got that one, maybe this will go with like a blue, and then maybe a pale blue over here, and more of a pink for this one. So we can kind of start to put together unique color combinations that work well. The other thing we can do is apply different metal colors. So maybe if we wanted this to be a two-tone piece, we could update all of our center settings to be our secondary metal. And then we could leave our shank in the white. So that is how we can kind of take those inspiration photos, kind of get feedback from our customer, and create some really unique and different designs using freehand parts. Let's move on to our next piece. And I will introduce one new feature. So right now we've been working completely in freehand. I'm saved this piece and I want to create something new. What you can do is come up here and choose New Session, which is in the version of CounterSketch that you have today. So you can just click New Session and it will take you back to the home screen, and then you can choose freehand to get back to a freehand screen. Alternatively, if you know that you are going to start a new freehand design, when you get the update in July, you'll have the option to select New Design. And that will basically remove kind of the job that you have been working on and bring you to a blank freehand screen. So you don't have to go through the steps of going to the home screen and then clicking on freehand. It just takes you to a blank slate where you can start with freehand parts. So again, that'll be a new feature that's part of the July update, but I thought it would be good to give you kind of some a little bit more information about the next coming updates. Oops. So for our next design, we're going to look at kind of this trend is something that we've been seeing for a while. It's in earrings, it's in necklaces, and it's definitely in rings. So I wanted to give you a little bit of how you might attack some of these different personalized, dainty, stackable, diamond accented bands. So you can see here, sometimes they're kind of this spiral look, which we do have a shank in freehand that does this. Sometimes they're all metal designs, sometimes it's metal with diamond accents, and it's all going to depend on what the customer is looking for. So these with hearts and bows are maybe a little bit more common, maybe something that you might have in your case that would be easy, to source from a vendor. However, sometimes customers are looking for something that's a little bit more personal, and so that's the approach that we're going to take today, is how to get something that's kind of a little bit more unique, a little bit more personalized through CounterSketch. So we're going to start out with just a basic dainty band. So I'm going to go into my freehand parts, look under shanks, and then within shanks I have this very first option, which is just kind of a hollowed out band. It's very, very simple. I am going to switch it up just a little bit as I get started. So because I'm going to make this dainty, I don't really need that hollow cutter, so I'm going to take that away. And I also want to make this pretty consistent all the way around, so I'm going to decrease my top thickness down to like 1.7, and that way everything will be consistent all the way around. Same thing here. I'm just going to decrease this to 1.7 so that everything I have a consistent thickness for my ring. I'm also going to look at my width. So at the top, this is a 3 versus a 2, so I'm going to bring the top width down to a 2, again just to get that nice symmetry kind of all the way around on this band that we have. We're going to use B today because I absolutely love this freehand part and I think it'll make a fun design. So we're going to go into animals. And we have this little bee. We have quite a few pieces at Stellar that feature him. I think we've got earrings and a necklace and a couple of other things, and it's very popular. So I wanted to use him just to make sure you guys were aware of him. This could be a heart, it could be an initial, it could be anything. But in my design this morning, I decided to do a bee. And we can take and kind of place him how we want on our shank. I'm going to have him where he just kind of lands at that awkward angle. And because this is stackable, I'm not going to worry about bending his wings or anything like that because we want everything to fit nicely together. So I'm just actually going to leave him kind of perched there on top without doing any bending to prevent him from getting in the way when I go to slide a stackable band in front or behind. And again, because these guys are stackable and we want them to fit nicely together, I'm just going to take this original band that we were working with and I'm going to duplicate it so that I have exactly the same dimensions on my stackable band that I had on my first. So I'm just going to drag it to the left and we're going to make this a stack of 3, so I'm going to mirror that over the top. So now I have my 3 stackable bands that we can use to kind of create this unique design. The next thing I want to do is add kind of a honeycomb looking shape to my design. So if I look under settings, I actually have a setting that has a honeycomb outline around it, or an octagon outline around it. You guys can correct me if I'm using the wrong math term. Octagon has 8 sides, right? What's 6 sides? I think it's a hexagon. But anyway, we're going to bring this piece out. And I know what you're thinking, like it has a big diamond in the center of it. Heather, we just want the outline of it. Not a problem at all with this piece. We have the ability to actually remove that center stone. So we can come over here and select center gem and setting, and it takes it away, which is incredibly helpful. Also right now it's set up for like almost a carat center stone. I'm going to drag this all the way down to about a 1/4 carat, and I may even go to 1/10 of a carat. So we're just going to do 3 millimeters by 3 millimeters and take a look and see how that looks. And I think that's a lot better personally, just to keep them in line with the scale of our bee. And then we can start to place this in our design. So we can bring it down. Again, we want it to make contact with the band, but we don't want it to go below the height of the band, otherwise it's going to get in the way when we go to stack things. So we're just going to bring it down to make contact. And let's move it just a little bit to the right. He's getting in the way of the bee. And again, if we want at this point, we can do opposite, and it will put another one over on our other band. So that's one way that you could kind of create this stackable with diamond accents, some metal pieces, and some stones. If we wanted to personalize this a good bit more, we could go in and add initials into these openings. We could add gemstones, maybe birthstones into those openings. We could bring back that center gem that was originally in here and give it a color and kind of do it that way. Or we could even fill in one of these and leave the other one open, almost like it's a true honeycomb where one of the combs has been filled and the other one hasn't. So lots of different ways that you can kind of play with this and approach using these. I do want to call out that we do have a hexagon that you could put in there. So if we come up here, this is a new part that was added to the library last month. You can add this guy out onto your screen and use it to fill in one of those shapes. So this is really easy, and it's something that you can do quickly, and I feel like you can add a lot of detail without taking a lot of time. So this is a lot of personalization, going through, adding all of these different components. But again, if all you're doing is choosing whether you want a bee or a scroll or a bow, you can kind of provide a really nice service to the customer without a lot of work or even a whole lot of knowledge on how to use the software, because you're just literally kind of placing these pieces into the design. So I think this is, especially if you have other staff members who are new to CounterSketch and kind of learning the basics, I think that these types of designs are really good for people to kind of learn with. So be sure to keep that in mind whenever, again, you're kind of working with your staff or even your customers and trying to create new things. And I love this little bit maybe recessed fill so that it, looks a little bit different, gives you a little bit more dimension. So those are all different pieces that we could look at. Again, in the same way that we did with our last component, if we want, we can choose that secondary metal color to come in and kind of give the ring a little bit more dimension. So just keep in mind that when you do choose to do things this way, you are looking at quite a few casting fees, so you want to keep that in mind as well. I know a lot of times with stackables, customers are very price point conscious about those, and so each of these rings would be considered a base, so you would have a $99 casting fee for the bases, and then these gold pieces would be considered trims, so they would be about $29 each for your casting fees. So if you do choose to do the two-tone, just keep in mind that while the metal price may be the same, there may be some additional labor charges just in creating and assembling the different pieces. And talk just a little bit about the render tools and settings. So as with a lot of the different tools in CounterSketch, we really hope to give you a good bit of choice when you are creating these renders. Renders can be used in a lot of different ways. Obviously, the primary way that we think of using a render is to present the design to the customer, right? We can see the design here on the screen. It's very attractive, but sometimes a render can be helpful to really bring that design to life, to give the diamonds facets, all of those different types of things. So renders can be really helpful in the sales process when you're presenting the design. The other thing that they can do is help you to market CounterSketch and the custom design that you do. So anytime you or your sales associates are working in the software designing something, encourage them to create a render and then pass that render on to your marketing team. Because if your marketing team is anything like ours, we are always looking for fresh new content to share with our followers. And so these renders can be used on social media. They can even be used in magazine and print ads to kind of bring across the fact that you do design work in your store. And most consumers cannot tell the difference between a render and an actual photo. Now, if you have a discerning consumer, maybe they could, but especially if you're thinking of trying out a new style or a new type of product, if you add those to your website, you can kind of start to get a little bit of feedback from customers based on interest before you have to commit to actually designing and purchasing that piece of jewelry. So I think renders can be really helpful to market the service and also to kind of gauge what your market is looking for by giving you a picture of something without necessarily having invested in producing the piece. And finally, our renders give you the ability to kind of reinforce your brand. So within our render settings, you have the ability to adjust lighting and different background colors, different props, different prop colors. And so if you have established branding colors and themes that you are using now, you can use CounterSketch to kind of reinforce some of that branding using your existing designs. So here is our kind of overview. We're going to talk about it a little bit, and then we're going to move into CounterSketch and actually apply some of this. So we're going to start out with theory and then move into application. So these are your render settings. Again, everything that I'm showing you here, the coloring and the buttons are like a little bit relocated, but it's all still available in what you have today. So while this is what the interface will look like in July, you still have all of these options today, so you can start playing with it right away. So you can see here at the top we have the render resolution. This determines how large the render is and how long it takes to render so that you can get a higher quality resolution maybe for something that you're planning to use in a piece of print marketing, or something that's maybe a lower quality resolution if you're planning to email it to a customer and you're concerned about file size. We also have the ability to lay the piece flat, so this can be helpful if you're using some of the different props. You can kind of lay the prop flat to see it in a different angle. We also have quite a few props to choose from, and we'll look through all of those. So if you're looking to add a little visual interest beyond just the design itself, you can use these props to accomplish that. Within the props, some of them have more than one material that you can apply. So we have like a ring box, and there's an outer and an inner material. So you can choose up to 2 different materials for the props that you select. And then we of course have our ground plane, which is what the ring is sitting on. And we have quite a few different options for that as well. We also have different environments. So if you think about the environment, that's basically if you had the ring in, in real life, or if the ring was sitting in front of you and you were going to take a photo of the ring, the environment is what is kind of around that photo booth that you're shooting the ring in. So it's kind of fun to play with. There's different lighting environments to choose from that are going to give you different shadowing on the ring. And so if you get something and you're getting a really dark shadow, then a lot of times you can kind kind of change that environment and get a brighter look. Or if you do want to emphasize kind of the dimension in the ring, you can choose a darker environment so that the detail really kind of stands out when you're rendering. So those are some options. You also have some output options here, and I think these are pretty interesting. So save renders to a folder. You can always choose to save a render, but if you always want to save the render to a specific folder, we can actually do that for you so that you don't have to click on that save icon every time you do a render. We will just automatically save every single render that you do. Also, if you're using something like Photoshop or another imaging software, you can also choose to render either your props and or your ground plane in an alpha channel. And that just means that those materials can be taken away so that in Photoshop you can make your own adjustments to the picture, either the background plane or the prop. So now that we've kind of talked through all these different options, if you're playing with the different options and you find a combination that you really like and that you again feel maybe is indicative of your brand, you can save that combination as the default, and that way every time you render, it's always going to render in that same kind of in those same settings. And that way you know that whether you're doing the render or maybe one of your staff members are doing the render, the customer is going to get a consistent render image that again represents your branding. So that would be the reason for the default. You can always reset your render to kind of the basic, which is what we have shown here, or you can come in and make adjustments every single time and then kind of get a unique render that way. So let's hop back over into CounterSketch and do some more practical application. So we've worked through this design and we've created our ring. I'm going to rotate this around until I get an angle that I like that kind of shows off the fact that one of these hexagons or honeycombs is full and the other one is not. So I want to get an angle that kind of portrays that and also helps you to see that these are stackable bands, those kinds of things. And I could shift this around on my screen, maybe make it just a little bit bigger. And then I'm going to come over here and left click on the gear, and that's my render options. As I mentioned, you've got different sizes that you can choose from. These are all the different options of render sizes that you can get. These up here, so if you notice above the word that says custom, from custom and above, these will be part of the July release. So you can see here we've got some standard sizes that are good for different social media platforms. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, Pinterest. These options are all going to be available. It's not that you don't have them now, we do have them, or you can set a custom option, but this way it's easy for you or your staff to go, yeah, I think I'm going to use this on Instagram, so I need to choose this render option to make it easier. As I said, today you still have all these render options down here. We're just going to make that social media render a little bit easier for you going forward. And then we have our props. So we've got quite a few props to choose from. As I mentioned, there's a ring box, there's a ring tray, there's even this neat little pedestal piece that we have. We have a ring mandrel that you can throw it on, or my all-time favorite is this twisted finger cloth. So, or what is that? Yeah, finger cloth twisted. So this is the one that I'm going to use for our design. And then we can choose what color that material is. So maybe we'll pick something a little bit neutral just so our design really stands out. I'll go with this primary prop material, and I don't really have a secondary prop material for this piece. The next thing we need to do is choose our ground plane color. So if we wanted this to be a little bit more natural, we could choose the wood, or we can search back through all of these. We've got quite a few colors to choose from. We've got things like marble and granite, even this really fun crayon one, which I might do just to give us something different. And so there's lots of different options to choose from here. We even have like a bamboo surface if you're looking for something a little bit more natural. So lots of choices there. And then the render environments, as I mentioned, you can see they kind of give you different levels of shading and shadow, and so we can choose from those. If I choose this Save Renders to folder, it will give me the option to browse, so I can tell it where I want all of those renders to be saved. And then again, if I'm really happy with this and I love the way it turns out, I'm going to click Save as Default. So now let's left click on Render, and it'll pull up our rendering engine and start to render out our design. And it's going to take into account that prop that I added and the color of that prop and the ground plane that I want. So lots of different options to choose from. And usually the first render of the day takes the longest because CounterSketch is going in and making the connections for that render agent. Usually the first one takes the longest, and then after that it's fairly quick to move on to the next one. So that looks pretty good. You can kind of see the detail there. I may want to try something that's more straight on rather than angled, just so that you can really tell that this is a stackable band. So I've seen this render. I don't have to let it completely render if I don't want. I can close it, reorient my ring, maybe to something like this where we've got a top-down view. And if I want an exact top-down view, I can always use this option up here, and then we'll just zoom in a little bit, and then I'll click Render. So I don't have to go back into my settings unless I want to change that ground plane or the material, but I can always just click Render and it will remember the last settings that I chose. And on this one you can see it's kind of breaking the plane, so I've got my ring too large. So I can actually close this, scale it down just a little, and then do a render again. So I don't necessarily have to let my render finish before I move on to the next one. And as you can see, these second and third renders are going a lot more quickly as far as getting started. It's just in the beginning, sometimes it takes a minute for things to get moving. Once we've created a render that we're happy with, we can go in and save this render. So you can see up here in kind of the center of these options within this render screen, I have the ability to left click here on Save, and then it just asks me where I want to save my render to on my desktop. So I can choose maybe pictures and then type in the customer's name or however I would like to keep up with them and save it. So that's how we work through renders and how we can use them. So I wanted to spend just a couple of minutes this morning talking about new designs that have been recently added to the collection. This first one is an eternity band that has some really neat prong configurations. It can be converted from an eternity into an anniversary to give you a half shank at the bottom as well. So this one I think is really fun and cool, especially if you're looking for some unique and one-of-a-kind kind of offset anniversary or eternity band options. This other option here is really cool too. It's a nice east-west design, and within the library you can actually remove these accent diamonds on the side and adjust the profile shape of these metal pieces so that you can add some visual interest there. Even if again you're not interested in having those diamonds, you can create some different textures. The next one is this ring that's kind of I would say a oversized halo design. It also sits really low on the finger, so I think it's unique because of that. You can also actually come in and remove this center stone and the bridge connecting the two, so that you just kind of have a round or whatever shape center stone you choose halo that you could then come back in and maybe add initials or scroll work or some other design. So this one's really neat, I think, not only because the design is beautiful, but it also has some flexibility where you can come in and remove some pieces so that you could make way to add some freehand parts to this design. So this one's a great one as well. And our fourth one is a really fun pendant. So it's got this accent stone at the top, and then it has this millgrain work around the sides. This one is the same as the ring that I just discussed. So you have the ability to remove this accent diamond. You can remove these millgrain beads around the side. You can also switch these millgrain beads out for accent diamonds, so do kind of like a halo look. And then again, you can remove the center stone and setting. So if you wanted to just have a halo outline or, something else, you could easily create that using this pendant design. So I do encourage you to check these new designs out. If you have CounterSketch open, they are actually going to be from your start menu. You can just left click on new designs and it'll take you to whatever we've most recently added to the library. I think our next library comes out on June 29th, so these guys will be in the new designs category until the 29th, and then they'll kind of go into their respective categories after that. But you can always click there to see what's new in the CounterSketch library. All right, again, just a reminder, we are on social media. So GemVision Corp is available at Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and soon to be LinkedIn. So please join us on social media. As I mentioned, we are going to be coming out with a new release for CounterSketch in the middle of July. And so we would love to kind of start to give you guys previews of things that are coming out. Obviously, you've been able to see the new interface here when you're on the webinar with me, but we have some new features that we want to make you aware of as well. And as July 15th approaches, we'll kind of start to create all of those different videos for you to jump in and check out. So definitely join us on our social media so that you can learn more about it. As I mentioned at the top of the webinar, we do record the webinar every month. So if you're interested in watching a recording of this webinar, all you have to do is go to stellar.com/webinars, and probably on Tuesday we'll have the video posted so you can watch the June webinar. If you missed the May webinar, the recording for that webinar will be up until I post the June webinar. So if you want to go back and check out that May webinar before we get the June one posted, maybe this week would be a great time to take advantage of that. Our July solution session is going to be on Thursday, July 16th. It's a little bit later in the month than we typically do it, but we are hoping to launch CounterSketch, the update on July 15th. So hopefully you guys will get that update on the 15th and then join me for a webinar on the 16th. On that webinar, we obviously are going to really focus on the new software update. We're also going to talk a little bit about some Pinterest to price examples using some of those new features that are going to come out in the new software update. So that, again, will be an exciting webinar. I hope that you'll be able to join me for that one and go over all the new features that we're hoping to release in July. As always, if you have questions outside of the webinar, you can email us at countersketch@gemvision.com and we'll be happy to get back to you with answers to those questions. Again, thank you so much for joining me this morning. I really appreciate your time. And like I said, I look forward to seeing you on the webinar next month and going through the new update. And hopefully we'll have some brand new features for you guys to play with that are really helpful. Thanks again.